They vowed to wipe Carthage from the earth, not just its walls, but its very memory. Rome didn't just defeat its greatest rival. It salted the land, burned the libraries, and rewrote history to cast Carthage as a monstrous empire deserving annihilation. But what if the opposite had happened? What if Hannibal's war elephants had trampled Rome into dust? His cunning outmaneuvered the legions, and Carthage emerged as the undisputed ruler of the ancient world? No Roman Empire, no Latin Europe, no Caesars, just a Mediterranean dominated by merchants, navigators, and the shadow of a vengeful general who almost changed history forever. This is the world that nearly was, before Rome erased it. Welcome to Unleash Facts, the place where history's secrets, unsolved mysteries, and mind-blowing truths come to light. A mighty empire is only as strong as its rivals. And when Rome looked out over the Mediterranean, it saw none more fearsome than Carthage. Their wars were a clash of titans, fought across 3 centuries from Sicily to Spain to the heart of Italy itself. Rome's victories expanded it into the Mediterranean's dominant power. But what if Carthage had won? What if Rome had been the one to fall beneath the waves of Hannibal Barca? History would have been radically different. The Punic Wars were a series of 3 devastating conflicts between Rome and Carthage that would determine the fate of the Western Mediterranean. The First Punic War 264 to 241 BCE began over control of Sicily and saw Rome build its first major navy to defeat Carthage's superior maritime forces. But it was the Second Punic War 218 to 201 BCE, the most famous, which truly determined the course of history. There, Hannibal's daring crossing of the Alps with war elephants and his near destruction of Rome at Cannae in 216 BCE forced the Romans to take the war to North Africa. There they finally defeated Hannibal at Zama in 202 BCE, securing a decisive victory for Rome. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, was a brutal Roman siege of Carthage, which ended with the city's utter destruction, its buildings razed, its survivors enslaved, and its land salted to ensure nothing would grow. So when we say that the Romans built a road to Carthage, well, that's not entirely accurate. Romans revered their ancestors and their traditions, seeing themselves as the heirs of a long line stretching back to mythical origins. In reality, though, Rome was founded in the 8th century BC by a small tribe of Italian peasants known as the Latins, who lived among other Indo-European tribes in central Italy. These people were pastoralists, herding sheep and goats up and down Italy's central spine, a practice still common throughout much of the ancient world. Rome's early kings mostly came from this local Latin population, ruling small city-states like the Alban kings or Etruscan nobles, who married their way into the throne like Tarquinius Superbus. But as Rome grew, so did the gap between the wealthy elites and the poor Latin farmers. By the mid-6th century, the last 7 kings were all Etruscan, and the gap between Rome's rich and poor had grown so great that a revolution ousted the monarchy and established Rome as a republic with 2 elected officials called consuls at its head. This is where the Romans really started to flex, taking advantage of central Italy's weak states to expand outward. But even as they marched north and south, the Romans encountered people of the sea, the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Carthaginians. The latter 2 had been trading along the Italian peninsula for generations, and the Phoenicians had actually established the first permanent settlement in western Sicily about 800 years before Rome was even founded. Rome's first contact with Carthage was thus inevitable, but how the Romans viewed these newcomers depended heavily on when you ask them. Early Roman accounts of their first contact with Carthage are vague, but it's clear that Rome's first encounters with Carthage were peaceful, trading along the coast or through intermediaries. By the end of the 400s, though, Rome's relationship with Carthage had taken a hard turn. According to Polybius, the Roman historian, The turning point came when Rome sided with the Greek colony of Rhegium against Carthage's ally, Croton. As part of this alliance, Rome helped Rhegium recover an important silver mine near the Strait of Messina. But when Croton asked Rome to mediate a dispute over the mine, the Romans refused, suspicious that Carthage intended to seize the lucrative mine for itself. When the Carthaginians seized some Roman merchant ships sailing to Sicily, Rome declared war. The First Punic War lasted for 23 years. From 264 to 241 BCE, it pitted Rome's land army against Carthage's powerful navy. Initially, the Romans suffered a string of defeats, losing entire fleets to the Carthaginians. The war also proved to be immensely costly, requiring the Romans to borrow money from Carthage's enemy, the Greek kingdom of Macedonia. Desperate for a solution, Rome turned to one of its most brilliant military minds, Gaius Duilius. His strategy was simple: build ships. Over the next few years, the Romans outfitted hundreds of warships and trained a new navy large enough to challenge the Carthaginians at sea. In 247 BCE, the Roman fleet met the Carthaginians off the coast of the Aeolian Islands. The battle was hard fought, but the Romans achieved a tactical victory. They captured several ships and forced the rest of the Carthaginian fleet to withdraw. Aided by this victory, Rome launched an amphibious invasion of Sicily. Soon, Rome's troops were marching across the island, forcing the Carthaginians to flee to their stronghold at Lilybaeum. With this base cut off from supplies, the Carthaginians surrendered. Rome emerged victorious after paying a hefty indemnity. It lost almost 300 ships to Carthage's navy, and the war had cost a staggering 70,000 Roman lives. But Rome had proven it could stand toe-to-toe with Carthage, and it paid off. From this point forward, Rome and Carthage became bitter rivals, competing for colonies in the western Mediterranean and clashing frequently over control of the seas. Eventually, these clashes culminated in the Second Punic War, the most famous of the Punic Wars. We're going to talk about it right after. At the start of the 3rd century, the Mediterranean world seemed poised for change. The once proud Assyrian Empire had crumbled, leaving a vacuum of power in the east. Meanwhile, the Greeks were exhausted after decades of war with the Persians and looking for peace. Carthage, however, smelled opportunity and planned to capitalize on both. After its victory over Rome, Carthage began establishing colonies across the western Mediterranean, including Sardinia, Corsica, southern France, and northeastern Spain. At the same time, Hannibal Barca's father, Hamilcar Barca, led a Carthaginian campaign into Spain, conquering territory and subjugating its native peoples. When Hamilcar died, his son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, took command of Carthage's Spanish territories and made one very crucial decision: swear an oath to avenge the Carthaginians' defeat in the First Punic War. With the stage set and tensions high, the Second Punic War erupted. In 218 BCE, Hannibal led his legendary crossing of the Alps, appearing in northern Italy with a massive army, elephants included. He proceeded to utterly defeat the Romans at the Trebia and Lake Trasimene before facing the full might of the Roman army at the Battle of Cannae. In this single engagement, Hannibal nearly destroyed 4 Roman legions, killing or wounding nearly 80% of the Roman soldiers present. But although he had defeated the Romans on the battlefield, Hannibal's victories failed to break the Roman spirit. Instead, the Romans shifted to a strategy of attrition, avoiding pitched battles with Hannibal and targeting Carthage's allies and supply lines. Meanwhile, the Romans sent an army under the command of Scipio Africanus to invade North Africa. After suffering defeat at the hands of Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, Scipio regrouped and defeated Hasdrubal at the Battle of the Ticinus. Then in 203 BCE, Scipio's forces decisively defeated another Carthaginian army at the Battle of Ilipa. This victory paved the way for Scipio to march on and capture Carthage's capital, forcing Hannibal to return to defend his homeland. But it was too late. On April 19, 202 BCE, Scipio defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama. But first, let's talk about what leads to this defeat. Even with Hannibal at the gates of Rome, the Senate refused to panic, but they also refused to act. After his crushing victory at Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal expected Rome to surrender or negotiate. Instead, the Roman Senate, led by the defiant dictator Fabius Maximus, rejected any talk of peace, fearing that yielding would allow Hannibal to establish a Carthaginian empire on Italian soil. They doubled down on resistance, raising new legions while avoiding direct battle, a strategy that bought Rome time. Meanwhile, Hannibal's army, stranded without siege equipment or reinforcements from Carthage, slowly weakened. Rome's stubborn refusal to break and Carthage's failure to send decisive aid doomed Hannibal's campaign. His greatest victory became a long, grinding stalemate, and in the end, Rome's endurance outlasted his brilliance. Behind Hannibal's eventual defeat lay not just Roman resilience, but the bitter envy and short-sightedness of Carthage's own Senate. While Hannibal was crushing Roman legions in Italy, the oligarchs back in Carthage grew resentful of his rising power and fame, fearing he would return a conquering hero and append their political dominance. Rather than sending him the reinforcements and supplies he desperately needed, they withheld support, prioritizing their own rivalries over victory. Some even hoped Hannibal would fail, if it meant preserving their grip on power. This fatal hesitation allowed Rome to recover, while Hannibal's army, abandoned by the very state it fought for, was left to wither. In the end, Carthage's greatest general was defeated not just by Rome, but by the petty politics of his own people. The terms of the ensuing peace treaty were harsh. Carthage lost all of its overseas territories and was required to pay a heavy indemnity to Rome. Hannibal, meanwhile, was forced to flee to Syria. This last-minute escape only happened due to a series of unfortunate events for Rome. During the Second Punic War, Rome lost its ally, King Philip V of Macedon, who was defeated and killed by the rising power of Greece, the Aetolian League. And in 214 BCE, the war in Spain took a bad turn when Hannibal Barca crossed the Pyrenees and defeated the Romans at the Battle of the Ebro. This allowed Hannibal's brother Mago to escape to Spain and live out the remainder of his life there. If Hannibal had managed to win the Battle of Zama and destroy the Roman army, the implications for the ancient world would have been enormous. For starters, Rome's plans to expand into the Western Mediterranean would have been over before they even started. Hannibal may have even pushed the Romans back into central Italy, possibly toppling the Roman Republic entirely. As for Carthage, a victorious Carthage would have established dominance in the Mediterranean, replacing Rome as the preeminent naval power. Rome would likely have been reduced to a tributary state, perhaps forced to pay annual tribute to Carthage, or even cede territory like Sardinia and Corsica. Carthage would have had extensive sway over Western Mediterranean shipping, having control over the lucrative trade of metals and manufactured goods coming out of Spain, as well as exerting control over the grain trade of North Africa. This wealth would have made Carthage potentially the richest state in the Mediterranean, and being a naval power would have given Carthage unprecedented cultural influence. Carthage's language, religion, and culture would have spread throughout the Mediterranean thanks to its vast merchant marine. And with control of the seas, Carthage would have been able to impose its culture on others, possibly making Punic one of the Koine or common languages of the Mediterranean, much like Koine Greek. The impact wouldn't have stopped there. Carthage's victory would have changed the balance of power in the Near East as well. Instead of siding with Rome during the Syrian War, Carthage may have supported Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. Together, they could have defeated Ptolemy in Egypt and Macedonian control over Greece. With no Roman interference, the various Hellenistic kingdoms like Macedon, Bithynia, and Egypt could have carved out stable states in the east. Even Christianity could have played out differently. We know that St. Paul converted on the road to Damascus. But if Rome hadn't conquered the Near East, Paul may have never traveled there, changing the course of the religion forever. Ultimately, the ancient world we remember with fondness and hindsight, simply because it gave rise to Rome, is a false memory. Had Carthage won, it would have been the greatest civilization of the ancient world, ushering in a new age of prosperity and peace. If you enjoyed this dive into ancient history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more epic alternate histories and untold stories of the past. Your support helps bring these forgotten worlds to life. See you in the next video.